Hello, my name is Igor Krupnik, and I'll be telling you something very, very different. I work with the Smithsonian. I'm a cultural anthropologist, which means that I work primarily with the living people and cultures of today. And I'm with the Smithsonian for the past 20-some years, first as an international fellow with the Arctic Studies Center, and then as a trust fund researcher, and for the past decade and more as a curator of Arctic and Northern ethnology. And what I do, I study cultures of the North primarily in two major transitions. One from the so-called traditional society through colonial contact, and the other one in modern days primarily through globalization, language and knowledge shift, and increasingly through global change, through global climate change. So global climate change normally is perceived, and particularly climate studies, perceived as something done by physical scientists or natural scientists, archaeologists doing environmental studies. So cultural anthropologists rarely had any impact in this until probably 15 years ago when we started documenting indigenous observation of climate change. And this is what my story will be about. We learned I'm probably supposed to show some of my slides. 15 years later and 5 books later, we learned something. And these are maybe two major outcomes. First, we learned that indigenous people have incredibly detailed knowledge of what is happening to their environment. And this is not a small deal because physical scientists and natural scientists, physical scientists in particular, used to downgrade indigenous knowledge as anecdotal evidence. It's not statistical, it's empirical, it cannot be measured or judged or modeled in a way they're familiar with. And the other thing that we learned is that the easiest way to document indigenous knowledge is to download it onto mental cultural landscapes or even icescapes. And this is the easiest way or the most convenient way to see how people view the environment and how they populate it with innumerable indicators or benchmarks that they watch and monitor 24/7 actually, and then download this information in stories and trails and place names and traditions that they pass to the younger generations. In practical skills and on, but this has to be tagged to a particular landscape or, as I said, icescape. And a few months ago, I gave an hour-long lecture on how people construct and use their cultural icescapes at the Anthropocene lecture series, so I won't squeeze it in the 6-minute spiel. My remaining minutes I will use to tell you something that I personally paid attention just very recently. What is happening with indigenous knowledge and indigenous observations that we again learn in the past 15 years is, as I said, it's not only very detailed, but it's very multi-component. People pay attention to so many things that instruments, automatic instruments, or weather or ice stations, or scientists working in teams rarely pay attention to. It's not only weather, ice, wind, clouds, but also all kinds of mammal species, birds, any events unusual, any kind of social activities related to the change, and this is all preserved in the community as a valuable knowledge pool. But there is one critical question when you read from the observer's record that we have collected for a number of years, that let's say this year the ice was formed later than normal. The question is, what is normal to these people? Very recently, just last month, 3 of my colleagues, geophysicists, produced that paper, The Arctic Shifts to a New Normal, in which they postulated that the Arctic of today is very different from what used to be 30 years ago. There is a new normal of the very thin ice, of the thawing permafrost, of the greening tundra, of unstable coastlines, and this is the environment to which scientists, Arctic residents, and the humanity has to adapt. And they also said, and here is the explanation of why it's happening, I cannot go into this. They also said that there was an old normal, about 30 years ago, made of very solid old ice, very cold long winters, and much more persistent weather regimes. And you cannot see this ice anymore, and you cannot see people going on that ice anymore. So what I'm concerned with is that we are working with very quickly shifting baselines, and that we're focused now in our documentation of indigenous knowledge is only today's baseline, while with those people who have this immense trove of knowledge through their life histories, we're losing because we're not documenting, because we're focused on today's change only. We are losing their past knowledge of change, their past knowledge of former baselines. And as you can see, people still can preserve it, but we are not asking. So my point is that very much like in biodiversity or in conservation studies, we need baselines. We need very well documented baseline, and the same in the documentation of indigenous knowledge. So this is a challenge we have to address. We don't know how to do it yet, but I would like to pose this question to you and hope we may respond to it soon. Thank you.